You're listening to LibraryCast, brought to you by Somerset Libraries. On this week's LibraryCast, we welcome Vivian Oldaker, who came runner-up in the Frome Short Story Competition for 2020 and also third place in the main competition. I caught up with Vivian Oldaker and talked to her about her short story, Missing the Boat. Welcome to LibraryCast. Vivian, welcome to LibraryCast. Is this your first competition that you have entered?
No, far from it, Jeremy. I've entered very many over the years and usually unsuccessfully, but I got lucky this time.
What is the motivation, the inspiration to actually put a story into a competition? Is it just to test your own creative skills? Is it some form of helping you to hone in on your stories? Does it give you inspiration to write a story specifically for a competition?
Yes, indeed it does. It gives you the inspiration to concentrate on something in particular. I'm very easily distracted, so having a deadline and having a theme or a competition date to work to is really helpful.
Congratulations for third prize, bronze medal in the Frome Short Story Competition with your story Missing the Boat. Wonderful title for a short story. I must admit, when I read it, it had lots of little surprises in there, lots of different themes. Was this written specially for the competition?
Yes, it was. I'd worked on a previous version of it before, but I honed it in order to get it right for the competition. I've also written a slightly different version of it in the form of a play.
I've read the story, thoroughly enjoyed it, touched on many themes, and I think we can all sort of relate to in many ways about families and relationships and the estrangements of relationships. Tell us a little bit about the story and what inspired you to write it.
Well, the competition inspired me to write it, but I think when you're wandering around sometimes you come across benches, memorial benches, and often they say this bench was placed here for Daphne, who loved this place, maybe some dates, and you sometimes think, I wonder what Daphne's life was like, and I wonder if she really loved this place, and you want to know more about the person. Usually you don't, of course. So I kind of went from there with it, really, and that's what inspired me to tell the story of not so much Daphne, but the person that put the bench there, her husband.
Which is Ted, of course. And Ted is
right.
very reflective on his life. How do you describe Ted, and what age would you say he was?
Ted is in his late 70s, possibly his early 80s, but he's lived a long life, and a life that's seen many changes in social attitudes. It's basically about a life unfulfilled. Ted is coming towards the end of his life, thinking back, as many of us do as we get older, about what might have been and how he might have taken a different path, the road he didn't go along, how social attitudes have changed, and how nowadays, if he had his chance again, he might have done things differently. He has an unfulfilled longing to be with his brother-in-law, James, which sadly never happens because of the social situation of the time.
You set it up very, very nicely, the relationship where the two couples were on holiday in the Italian Riviera, and then James and Ted go on the back of the scooter into town, and you mentioned dire straits in the story. And from there's a kind of twinkle in their eyes. Why did you set that particular part of your story in Italy?
I just think because Italy's a very romantic place, and they're away from their normal home environments, and the effect that music and moonlight can have on people sometimes. Also, the Dire Straits song that they're listening to, Water of Love, is a very romantic song, and perhaps would inspire them to express feelings for one another that they might not have been able to do in Surrey, perhaps.
There's things that I relate to in the story, which I'm happy to share, which is very much how families sometimes have these real secrets that they wish to keep from family members because it's etiquette, it's the right thing to do at that particular time, especially in the sort of 60s and 70s, which I've experienced. At the same time, it's not losing face, isn't it? It's being able to look proper to your neighbours and those around you. And yet I felt very saddened when in your story that Daphne's sister had died, and yet it took 3 years before she found out. Why do you think at that time everything was so kind of prim and proper? And do you feel now, as you're writing the story, when you reflect on the contemporary writing, there's a greater openness that wasn't there in the past?
Oh, absolutely, yes. As I say, I think if the main characters had been younger and living their lives now as young people, it might have been a totally different situation. But especially to Daphne, that's Ted's wife, respectability is everything and appearances are everything. And especially once they return from Kenya, she is very keen to live what she would consider to be a respectable life. And appearances are very much to the fore, which perhaps nowadays they wouldn't be so much.
How long did it take you to write the story, develop your characters in it? And really, the other question I'm quite interested in, did you sort of change certain elements of the story, the actual plot, in a way that the ending was different to how you first imagined it when you first put pen to paper?
I didn't really change the ending. It took me several weeks to write it, and I had to think about how it had happened and where it had happened a bit more. At one point I had James and Ted having their romantic encounter in Spain, but then I thought, no, Italy is better. But yes, I'd say it took several weeks, and the thing is, it's never really finished until the deadline is there, and then finally you cross the final T and dot the final I and think, that's it. And then after you've sent it off, you think, gosh, I wish I'd changed that second paragraph. But so it's never entirely finished, but it takes several weeks to do it, yes.
And what's the editing process? So it's 2,000 words, I believe, for the competition. Do you start by writing more and then editing down and doing a few rewrites? Or is it more of a kind of a one-stop? You write, you put your head to paper, you plan it all, and then just write it, and that is the finished article. What is your process for short stories? It must be very different to writing plays.
It is. I tend to overwrite, so then there is a lot of editing and cutting that needs to be done. It's not very often that I get it right on the word count first time, let's put it that way. Yes, it does take quite a bit of editing and to get the word count down. When I've written it as in a drama form, it's of course different.
What's your experience of the Frome Festival?
Well, I have to say I've entered the short story competition a couple of times before and got nowhere. I don't live in Frome, and so I haven't actually experienced the Frome Festival in person before. I've never actually been to any of the events. But I hope to remedy that in future if COVID-19 ever goes away and we all get back to some sort of normal.
I'm talking with Vivian Oldaker from the Frome Short Story Competition, and we're talking about her short story, Missing the Boat. And I asked her also about her young adult book that she has written called The Killer's Daughter, published by Anderson Press.
Well, I'm always writing. That particular book, The Killer's Daughter, I wrote some time ago, and it was published in 2009, so a lot of water has flowed under the bridge since then. Nowadays, I generally focus on drama. I got really fired up to write drama after going on an outreach course in my local village. And I was very pleased to do that because I think outreach courses are hugely valuable to those of us who live in rural areas. And it's not something that I would have thought of doing if I hadn't been on the course. And the course got me really fired up. And so I started writing drama, which I mostly do nowadays, although I'm still writing short stories. And I'm working on a novel, but it's taking me like 100 years to get anywhere with that. Where with that.
But one never knows, this is the thing, isn't it, about writing? And there's a lot of self-published writers in the Southwest who have really gone on to establish themselves by doing exactly what you're doing, which is writing, maybe self-publishing, going to libraries. We put on lots of events in libraries. So we'd love to invite you to a library, probably Frome Library, as the nearest library where the short story competition is, and maybe we could reenact one of your plays. How does that sound?
That sounds superb. I would love that.
I was wondering, Vivian, if you would share with us a little excerpt from your short story that came third in the short story competition for the Frome Festival the story called Missing the Boat.
Missing the boat. Ted sat on the scrubby grass, watching the water slap against the peeling hull of the rowing boat. The rope mooring it to the jetty was old and frayed. It belonged to the people in the house opposite. They would soon have to replace the rope or risk losing the boat, which had certainly seen better days. It had a name, but Ted couldn't bring the blur of letters into focus. He took his binoculars from the front pocket of his rucksack, and the words "Summer Promise" swam into view. The sun was burning the top of his head. He had neglected to bring his old straw trilby to the river. It was August, the heat relentless, and the string of sunny days seemingly endless. 3 rambunctious teenage boys occupied the nearby bench. It bore an inscription, "In memory of Daphne Roberts, who loved this place, 1934 to 2018. In fact, Daphne, Ted's wife, hadn't particularly loved this place. She'd preferred the spot down by the weir, but as that was already blessed with 2 benches, he'd gone against her wishes. He had seldom done so while she lived.
Thank you very much, Vivian Oldaker, for joining us for the short story competition for the Frome Festival.
Thank you, Jeremy.
To find out more about the Frome Festival short story competition, why not visit their webpage, which is just called fromeshortstorycompetition.co.uk, and on it you can find more information about the festival itself, about this year's short list finalists, as well as reading their stories. On top of that, hopefully, this week's LibraryCast and future weeks will inspire you to consider writing your own stories to enter into the 2021 festival's competition. Join us again next time, where we'll be talking to another of the finalists from the Frome Festival short story competition. You have been listening to LibraryCast, brought to you by Somerset Libraries, bringing to you libraries from home.